Hello everyone, my name is Rhiannon from Blue Dog Board Games, and today I'm going to actually dive into my very first review video, and we are going to be today reviewing the game of Zoo Tycoon the Board Game. So this review is coming from a solo perspective. I am almost solely a solo player, and so I am going to be reviewing it from that point of view. I have also played this one two-player, only once however, so I will sort of at the end of the review give a bit of an overview how I feel about the multiplayer mode and how that differs, but ultimately solo mode is where we're going to be focusing today. So just to give you a bit of an overview of what the game is like and what sort of game it is, Zoo Tycoon is a zoo management game, a strategy game for 1 to 4 players, and it's got quite a long play time ranging between like an hour and a half up to around the 4-hour mark, I would say. My average solo plays of this game have been between like an hour and a half to 2 hours, and my 2-player game of this one took about 3 hours. So I would think that for a 3 or 4 player game, if there's some like table talk going on, this could probably push up to the 4-hour mark. So what I want to do today is just break down the game into certain components, talk about these individually, and then finally give this game a score out of 10. I'm going to be focusing on the gameplay loop, how the game all works in terms of what themes you're going to be finding in there, focusing on the theme itself, the complexity, components in the game, as well as replayability. I'm also going to talk about, in comparison with Ark Nova, how this one plays differently, what I feel about this one in comparison to that one, just in case you are curious and are wondering which one to pick up if you're interested in the theme. So without further ado, we're going to dive straight into the review. We're going to start off our review with gameplay loop. Zoo Tycoon is a board game that is split into 7 years, and each year you are playing through each of the seasons, bar the first year, which is a little bit different. Each season focuses on a very different aspect and different actions that you can take during that particular season. So in spring, for example, you are going to be focusing on rolling die, breeding your animals, and seeing if you are generating any offspring in your zoo. This is an area of the game where a lot of luck can come into it, because you are essentially rolling die according to each breeding female and hopefully meeting the threshold for that particular animal to breed. This is a part of the game, therefore, that can feel punishing in some ways. If you have a particularly bad streak of rolls or you're continuously rolling low, it can feel a little bit detrimental to you and can be a little frustrating. This is somehow offset by your ability to use a worker meeple to re-roll one of the breeding die, but you're only able to do that once per species, and you only have 1 free meeple, so each subsequent meeple you're using will increase your running costs. The solo mode of the game actually uses like a counter to tick up their like breeding potential and their breeding capabilities. And in my solo plays, I've actually found it very challenging to keep up with them. A lot of the times I'm very restricted according to the happiness of my animals. I can't get them up far enough into their happiness rating so they are breeding, and also when they are breeding, I'm usually not rolling the 5s or 6s needed to breed them. So that aspect of the game, if you're not too interested in luck in your game, that is one of the areas of the game in which luck is incorporated, and it can feel a little bit frustrating. So that's what happens in spring. In summer, this is where you are trading your animals, and honestly it's of an area of the game where you are going to be sat there thinking for quite a long period of time. I particularly enjoy the interaction of the solo mode in this particular area of the game, because what happens is you are able to take a trade of animals at the animal exchange. So you're able to, for example, just take like one species into your zoo, like a lion, but then the AI sort of draws a couple of cards to see what they're taking. That doesn't necessarily block off what you are, but then if you want to make a second trade in the zoo, you are drawing from another deck of cards to see what they have claimed, and you are no longer able to grab those animals. I found this to be a really, really fast but really simple way as to create interaction, to create that sort of multiplayer experience without having to take too much away from your turn. This is also somewhere where the AI, I call it an AI, it's not really a bot or anything, it's just an interactive opponent in some degree. They're able to also claim conservation projects in this phase as well, if they have incorporated certain animals in their little zoo setup. I say their zoo setup, you're not worrying about their zoo, they are simply drawing animal cards and just taking those animals. all you are doing when they are drawing those cards is looking at those conservation symbols, and if they have ticked all of those off in a particular conservation project, they grab that project and are scoring those conservation points at the end of the game. So there is definitely a race aspect to this game in that regard. You are constantly checking where they are in claiming those conservation projects and are trying to like beat them to it, if you say. Quite often I have found that I've only been able to get 1, maybe 2 conservation projects at the most. So if they are competing with you for that particular conservation project that you're focusing on, it can feel very challenging to try and get there before them because they are often very quick to grab those points. I think this is a fabulous idea, however, because it is just quick, easy, simple. You don't have to worry about what they're doing. You're drawing cards and checking the board very, very quickly, and it creates the feeling of a multiplayer game without being too complex. It really creates a really good puzzle-like feel to the game. So autumn is probably the longest phase of the game. This is where you are basically building up your zoo. You are introducing animals into enclosures, building those enclosures, building extra like, focal points and buildings, and trying to work out all your running costs. Luckily, in a multiplayer game, this is all done simultaneously once everyone knows what they're doing. So the downtime isn't so much when people understand the rules, but this is definitely, and I will go back to this later, a point where some downtime definitely can be seen. When you are playing the solo mode of the game, the only interaction that you're sort of seeing in that particular phase is having a look at some of the extra parts. So you are checking the donor card, and I believe you're checking your conservation track as well, seeing whether you've met certain criteria and then working out whether you gain that particular bonus enclosure tile on your turn. And if I'm honest, I think that is just a brilliant thing to integrate it in the solo mode. It again makes it so quick and easy to work out. You can look at a glance, even before that phase begins, you know whether you're going to get those particular bonus tiles, and that is essential for all of your planning throughout the entire year. This again gives you something to really push towards each and every round as well, because you are trying to meet those criteria as soon as possible and as many times as possible. You're trying to push up your conservation track to meet these markers that you're trying to pass each year. If you meet that marker or exceed it, you gain an additional enclosure tile. And it is so essential to try and keep that pace as much as possible in the solo mode, and so you get those additional enclosure tiles. Ultimately, this is the longest and most complex part of the game. This is where a lot of thinking and working out takes place, and it does take a lot of time to sort of spatially look at all of those aspects on your board and put everything together. So I do wonder if this could have been streamlined and simplified in some way. However, I would worry that that would detract from the experience a little bit. Ultimately, this is where it feels like you are managing a zoo. That complexity and everything that you're trying to take into consideration during that phase is where that feeling of being a zoo manager comes from. And I think that they have done a very good job here of encapsulating that theme and feeling. This is definitely a phase where the whole game can feel quite overwhelming, but none of the particular steps in this phase are that complicated in isolation. Just altogether there is a lot to think about and a lot to consider. So I would just say take it step by step and just make sure you're reading all the rules step by step as you go. Maybe follow it through the first few rounds and it will all fall into place. Building up your enclosures, this is all a tile placement aspect, and this is where you are also starting to look at caring for your animals, and you're using tokens to track on your animal cards how happy they are according to how much space they have, their group size, how many enclosures they have, and how much experience you have taking care of that animal. So there are a lot of tracks to be sort of mindful of in this game and in this phase in particular, but this ultimately is where the crux of the strategy is in this game. So winter finally is like an admin phase of the game. So this is where you're calculating your income, your revenue, according to what running costs you have. You're also comparing where your markers are on certain tracks with certain other markers that you've placed at the setup stage to see whether you gain certain bonuses in the following year. As mentioned before, this is where this creates a really interesting concept here of the game can feel like a bit of a race in certain regards because you are trying to meet those criteria At all times of the year, you're trying to keep up with that pace, especially on the popularity track, because there is a marker there and it starts pretty much at the bottom of the track according to how much you're able to charge for your tickets. And at the end of every single year, this increases by 1 segment. And so you only gain additional bonus to your revenue if you meet that segment or exceed it. And so you're always trying to keep up with that pace of those ever increasing markers to get those bonuses. It's a really, really interesting puzzle, this game. It always feels like a very exciting and tight race. Ultimately though, it's not too much of a race because at the end of the day, it's not detrimental to not meet those criteria. There's probably at least one of the tracks where you are going to lag behind, and that's okay. I've still had very successful games where that is the case. So if you're not too much into racing games, I call it a race. It's not really a race aspect, but it's more with trying to keep the pace going and trying to always look for that next burst of progress in your zoo, whether that's integrating a new animal or allowing a new species to breed, or even reintroduce some species into the wild to really just get those points going as quick as possible. This also really helps the game to sort of simulate the feel of a multiplayer game once again, because you are only receiving bonuses when you exceed certain thresholds, and much like a multiplayer game, if you are sort of the first person or in the same segment as the first person, you will be receiving those bonuses too. So there's lots of similarities between the multiplayer and the solo game, and the solo mode does a really good job of trying to make it feel like a multiplayer interactive game and a challenging game to play without having too much complexity in terms of running a bot or an automa. So overall, all of the seasons feel a little bit strange in terms of their ebb and flow. Spring and summer are reasonably fast seasons. Spring is really fast and summer can be slowed down slightly by the animal exchange component, followed by a very slow and sluggish autumn phase a lot of the time, and a quick as a nip winter phase, just because of what you're actually trying to do in those phases. Spring definitely does have quite a lot of luck element to be considerate of in terms of breeding your animals. Summer also has an element of luck as well when you are pushing the animal exchange around, because you are only able to trade animals that are either in demand or are available to you. Autumn is much more of like a tile placement and spatial puzzle, and also you are trying to consider so many different things during this particular phase at one time. So this is where your ultimate strategy head must be on. And finally, winter is literally just your admin phase, which a lot of strategy games do have. On top of that as well, you do have 3 zookeeper meeples that you can use. So there is an element of worker placement in this game. However, that is sort of isolated to your own player board, so these worker placement spots are not going to be competed for in terms of an AI blocking anything or opponents blocking anything either. They're always going to be available to you. So that's basically it in terms of the gameplay loop of the game and how it feels and what sort of elements it brings in. We're now going to have a look at the theme of the game and how thematic it feels. If it feels like you're running a zoo, I think this game does an absolutely brilliant job of feeling like a zoo management game. There are just so many layers that you are trying to consider all at once here, and it really does feel like you are a zoo manager trying to juggle your ever increasing fussy guests and trying to keep them happy at all times. So you're just constantly thinking about how much space your animals need, how happy they are. You want to try and focus on integrating really popular species in your zoo to create popularity and buzz. You want to try and get them happy so the animals breed. You're looking at what animals are available to exchange so you can trade out offspring. There's so many layers that you are considering, as well as your running costs. This is such an important aspect of your game, because at the end of the game in the solo game, I think in the multiplayer as well, if you end your year or your game on minus money, you actually lose. You don't even get to consider yourself in any ranking system of whether you are a winner or runner-up. You just automatically lose. So running costs are absolutely critical to sort of be aware of. And so the fact that there's just so much going on, it really feels like you are trying to manage absolutely everything, and you feel overwhelmed a little bit of how much there is to consider. saying it is a little overwhelming though. I don't think it is too bad, and I think it's, when you are going into this game, you understand it is going to be a heavier experience. It's going to be a very deep strategy game, and it definitely does not shy away from that, but I don't think it's anything excessive. And I will say all of the rules, although there's a few like nitty-gritty rules and some of the examples in the rulebook could be clearer, they definitely do feel very logical, and so everything does pan out as you sort of would expect it to in the reality of running a zoo. There is quite a lot of like realism and when you're running the zoo as well, so everything down to say like the animal exchange. So there's certain animals that come up for like they're in demand, so much like a real life zoo, like more species will ebb and flow in terms of their availability from zoo to zoo, so you can only trade animals out if they're in demand. There's not always like males and females of all the species that you can integrate into your zoo at once as well. And the animal breeding, I love the animal breeding, even though it's die rolling, I really don't mind. I really like that aspect. There's a really cool mechanism where the animals will only breed when they are happy enough, which is very realistic, and their happiness is determined by like their enclosure size, how much experience you have in keeping that animal, how many shelters they have, and the group size. And then on top of that, you're also considering the like mix of male and females in the enclosures, because some animals only like a dominant male to be there. And on top of that as well, you are also considering the nurturing aspect of that particular species. So some females will only breed for a year, then they need a year to recover from breeding, and so you're only breeding them bi-yearly. There is so many aspects like that that really portray a realistic animal management point of view, and so you're really trying to consider each animal for its individual needs and requirements, and I just think that that provides a really realistic zoo management feel in this game. You can really see the research and care and attention that the designers have injected into this game to really create this feeling of a very full and complete zoo management game. It really does feel very much like a Zoo Tycoon board game, as it should, and it really has succeeded. I mean, I come away from my plays of this feeling quite exhausted and drained, but thoroughly invigorated and enhanced by my involvement in this whole game. You get sucked in and you are very in the moment when you are playing it. So that's it for the theme of the game. I think this is hit the nail on the head with theme in terms of how it feels being a zoo manager in this game. We're now going to move on to components, and I will try not to waffle on too much about the components because, as you can probably know, I think this game is just spot on. So the copy that I own is the deluxe version of the game, so all of the animal meeples that I have are screen printed. This is not going to be the case in the standard version of the game, which I believe may be available on their website at a later date and in very select retail places. These will just be the wooden animal meeples, but these will not be screen printed. I will say though that the animal meeples and, you know, all of those parts are just absolutely fantastic. They're a work of art. They are absolutely gorgeous, and you know, that just sets the game apart for me in terms of components. I will say that some of the animals, the males and females, are designed to be slightly different colours. Some of them have unique artwork as well. I will say there are a couple of species that I have very slight difficulty determining the males and females just from the colour alone. So if you're sifting through the boxes, some of them I do have slight difficulty determining which ones are which, but there's only one or two species for that particular problem. I have also found that I have run out of a couple of species as well. They do say that they are not limited, so I ended up substituting one of my like ibex for a female zebra a couple of times because they're the same sort of colours. It's not too much of a problem, but it is just something that could potentially be more of an issue at higher player counts, especially as this was, I believe, in my solo game or in the two-player game. If a couple of people were actually trading all of those same animals and integrating all of those into their zoo, I think that could potentially be an issue. but it's not too much of a problem at the lower player counts, and it's easily dealt with. So the player boards, the scoring board, and the animal exchange are all very well made, and all of the artwork on them is really nice without being too busy. The animal exchange actually works by having very small windows cut out, and there's like a sheet underneath it, so you are sliding the board down in your every year to reveal a different combination of animals that are available to be traded, and this can be viewed through the window. This can be a little bit fiddly, but it isn't too bad. I do feel like the windows are a little bit small sometimes, as there's so much on your table as you're playing this game. If I am sort of at the bottom and I'm trying to see the windows at the very top, I sometimes have to like keep leaning over just to see what the offering is, because the windows are quite small and the printed sheet underneath is quite small text. But there is an awful lot of detail that they're trying to pack into this, a lot of variation in that sheet, so you get a different game every time. But so it's not too much of a problem, and you're only interacting with that one for a very small segment of the year. I do really like that aspect. Ultimately, I think the animal exchange is quite a novel concept of changing it up. Essentially, you can just change where you start the animal exchange every game. So playing 2 games back to back, there will be a different selection of animals available per year. The main animal species as well each come with their own card. Each player has a set of all of these cards themselves, so you can all take the same main species if you want to. These cards are really, really lovely. They're really quite big, and their artwork on them is just absolutely gorgeous. It's something that I would want printed off and displayed in my home. It's really, really lovely. The artwork across the game is really nice, and you are tracking on these cards your happiness rating. So you have 4 cubes that you can use to like track up and down how happy your animals are. This definitely can get quite fiddly, especially if you are playing on like a very slippy surface. If you knock a few things around, you're not going to know where you are. I haven't found it too much of a problem. Essentially, you don't tend to have a humongous amount of animals in your zoo at the end of the game. Probably you're looking at around 6, maybe 7, maybe 8 if you're really going for it. So the storage solution of the game was something that was very interesting to me. They've attempted to go completely like plastic free, and they succeeded. The only plastic that can be found in the entire game, it was from the cling film like plastic wrap that came around the game when it first arrived. I've also grabbed a couple of really large plastic bags as well to keep the enclosure tiles in, but I believe they were supposed to come with the game, but unfortunately during packaging that was left out. So apart from those little aspects, this is entirely plastic free, and this is entirely appreciated. This is amazing. The storage solution itself are individually printed little cardboard like tuck boxes, and these will very, very snugly fit in the bottom of the box. So far this has been a really good solution. This also allows you to take all of the tuck boxes out of the box and have them all on the table, so you don't have to worry about getting separate pots for all of your species. You just literally lift it all out of the box and it's all ready to go. So this creates like a really, for the size of the game it is, a really reasonable setup time. Also storing it away, I haven't actually got it out and stored it away and out again too many times at the moment, so I can't comment too much, but it all does fit very, very snugly. You put the tuck boxes in and then layer all of your balls and that on top, so I cannot imagine that there's going to be that much movement even if you store it upright. I'm probably going to be storing it lying down just in case, and I want to try and keep it as obviously as nice as possible. But for an attempt at a plastic-free storage solution, I think this is a really, really solid attempt, and I'm really excited to see if this is something that can be like brought out in other games, and whether it is actually in the long term a good solution. So I will say that the rulebook is probably where this game is let down very slightly. The rulebook itself is not bad. All of the rules tend to make sense. It's nicely laid out. But I just think for the complexity of the game, it's a little bit sparse in examples. There have been quite a few things that I've needed to clarify a little bit. There's been a couple of missing rules because I've noticed a couple of things on the diagrams that they give but don't specifically say it in the text. I've had to go to Board Game Geek a couple of times just to clarify with the designer what their intention was and how certain things worked. On the whole though, you can get a pretty good idea of how to play this game from just reading the rulebook, and I think it's a reasonable attempt for a first printing of a game. Honestly, a lot of the cons that I may have with this game definitely could be ironed out in a second printing, and then this game would just be elevated even more for me. But the rulebook was certainly where it was slightly a more challenging entryway to gaming for me. Finally, in terms of components, there are player aids available, and I will say there is a mistake on one of the player aids, but it isn't a huge one. It shouldn't have, as long as you've read the rulebook, it shouldn't affect you too much. And they are reasonably useful, not hugely, but there is not a solo mode player aid. And I will say that this game, because of the complexity, and there are a few things that you are trying to keep track of when you are playing the solo mode, and it's not entirely clear when you're reading through the solo mode in the rulebook, it's specifically when you are using that like AI action, when they're activating certain things. And if you had a solo player aid, that could just solve so many problems and solve so much flicking back and forth through the rulebook. The rulebook itself is really, really big. It's practically the size of the box. And so it's not just a little thing that you can keep on the side of your table. I need it on an entire chair next to me. And so that's one thing that I really do wish was in the game. There is a very, very kind Board Game Geek user that has uploaded a solo player aid, and so I will be getting that one out printed because this game does need one. So that's it in terms of components for the game. I am in love with the components of the game. It's just one of my most beautiful games in my collection. We are going to move on to how replayable this game is and how much variation there is from game to game. So unfortunately, in the solo mode and a multiplayer game, there isn't that much variation in setup. In fact, the only variation in setup that you're going to see is where your the state of your animal exchange. So as I said, there are like small tables behind the animal exchange board that you're going to be like moving your animal exchange board over to reveal one of the windows underneath. And so you can choose where that window starts on your game, and that is the only variation that you're going to see across the game. I say that as if it is a negative. Ultimately, this can actually change the game quite a lot, because your first year of your game, you are looking at what animals are available and ultimately integrating those into your zoo from the off. This will change quite drastically how the rest of the game does pan out, because a lot of the games will sort of depend very much so on what species you specifically start with in your zoo, in terms of whether you are going for reintroductions because you've got a level 3 species, or whether you're going through trying to get those conservation points by getting as many conservation projects as possible, so you're focusing more on level 1 and level 2 species. So ultimately, although from the off there is not a lot of setup differences, you are essentially going to be starting the game at the same point every time. That just small variation in animal exchange setup can actually change the way the game pans out quite drastically from game to game. From a solo mode as well, and in a multiplayer game, the fact that there is going to be some blocking of a second trade action, whether the opponent has taken an animal that you were eyeing up, or the opponent, when you're drawing cards in the solo mode to see what they are blocking, they may be blocking certain things that you are wanting as well. So you're constantly having to change your plan essentially and adapt to what is available and what's not available. So just through the card draw alone, those things are going to change as well. There is quite a bit to actually explore in this game in terms of looking at all of the conservation projects. There's still a good couple of conservation projects I've not been able to achieve. These are achieved when you are actually integrating a certain few types of animal in your zoo. So you may need 3 different savanna species and you get that particular savanna based conservation project. So by focusing on a different number of those every time, or trying to get one that you haven't obtained before, there's definitely quite a lot of replayability from that perspective. Also, there's a couple of slightly special animals. So you've got the Asian elephant in the game, which is quite a difficult one to obtain because it's got another set of entry requirements before you can introduce it into your zoo. And there's also the giant panda. I've not managed to even get to the giant panda yet. The giant panda can only be obtained when you have already integrated a good number of other quite challenging species into your zoo, and you have the ability to then integrate your panda into your zoo, and only one player and can get that panda. This is also simulated in a solo mode. The AI has a chance to like grab that panda away from you, and you are then unable to grab it for the rest of the game unless you quickly steal it off him in that same year. So I do feel, although there's not a lot of differentiation in setup, there's quite a lot of depth to explore in this game. There's lots of different avenues you can sort of focus on, and as I've played it a good number of times now, a good number of hours, and I've still not got even close to obtaining that panda. So there's definitely a lot to sort of work up to, and it does create a bit more of a I want to come back to it feeling. I did find it a little bit disappointing when I received it that although in the Kickstarter the designers were talking about some like scenarios being incorporated in the solo mode as well as the like automa, but ultimately I think it may have been a good decision to slash the automa. I think there may have been too much to upkeep with that. But they were definitely talking about some sort of like scenarios to incorporate in the solo mode, whether there's like targets to work towards. And I think that they missed a trick a little bit there. I do sort of wish that they incorporated something like that. I think that would have just elevated that game to the next level for me. And ultimately, I've sort of found myself half coming up with those myself, so I don't feel like it would have been that difficult to do. For example, one of my zoos that I recently played, I only had savanna-based species in my zoo, and it was not really that deliberate. It was just what came up at the animal exchange at the right times, how much space I had, and so I just ended up with all the savanna species, and I just thought you could integrate a lot of those sort of ideas into just like a checklist of different scenarios or targets that you could have in a solo game. So have only savanna-based species in your zoo, or only tropical, or try and get at least 5 I don't know, savanna-based species in your zoo, to have different targets to work towards, or different scores to meet, or meet an education score of 35 and try and tick all of those off and try and achieve all of those. Achievement system. That's what the solo mode is sort of missing. And it is very easy to sort of integrate that sort of idea yourself, and I'm sure over time a lot of users, Board Game Geek users, will integrate those into the community. But I just think that that definitely could have been something that could have been integrated at very little cost and effort for the designers. So that's it in terms of replayability. We're now going to have a look at how complex I think this game is. So it's no secret that there is quite a bit going on in this game, and I think honestly a lot of people will know this going into it unless they just haven't done a bit of research. Over the past few weeks, I have seen this heaviness rating on Board Game Geek creep up and up and up. I saw it before the Kickstarter fulfilled. I think it was at around 3.8. It's now reaching like 4.01. Was it 4.1? I think it might be reaching 4.1-ish now. And so it's definitely a more complex, strategic and technical game than some other games out there. Especially when you may compare it to like Ark Nova, I do feel like this is a step up in complexity. However, I do think that this is one that, as with every game, it definitely smooths out, and because the rules are so logical and based in like lifelike scenarios in terms of like happiness and running costs, once you have reached that hurdle, I think the plays are automatically a lot smoother. As long as you are prepared to perhaps do a little bit of extra legwork in terms of looking up for some examples on Board Game Geek, maybe watching a tiny bit of a video, just to clear up some of the lack of clarity there is in the rulebook. I don't think that this is too high a barrier to entry for some people, but it's definitely harder than it maybe should have been. So none of the rules in themselves are particularly complex. I think the complexity just comes into it when you are considering how many different things you're trying to think about at one particular time. For example, like in the autumn phase of the game, when you're building up your enclosures in your zoo, you are focusing on so many different things at once. So you are thinking about how many tiles you have available to you, how many tiles you may have available to you next year, how many tiles you have that may be available to build a new enclosure, whether you're going to be focusing on integrating a co-species at that time, how much money you have, and whether you want to buy a new enclosure tile. Have you got enough money to integrate your new animal and buy all of their buildings, their shelters that they need? How happy they're going to be, because that may affect whether you're going to get a bonus in the next phase. And there's just so many things that you're trying to take into account all at once. And so quite often it's just a little bit of a, whoa, you are just so overwhelmed. Ultimately, I do feel like it could be too much for some people. And if you're not used to a heavier sort of game, this definitely could feel like too much of a barrier and be too much to cope with at one time. There is a lot of fiddliness here, and I know a lot of people were put off from that aspect, but I just ultimately feel once again that sort of enhances the theme of this game, and you are quite invested in each individual animal that you introduce into your zoo. They are very much part of your zoo, and fiddling around with their enclosures and all of their happiness markers just helps to integrate that theme even more for me. So that's basically it from a solo perspective. I will now just discuss how I felt playing the multiplayer game and how that may differ from the solo mode. So the multiplayer game is actually very non-interactive. In fact, the only interaction that you're probably going to have in the multiplayer game is at the animal exchange, where your opponent may actually take one of the animals that you were eyeing up, and the trades are sort of done in a snake action, so it would go like me, you, back to me. And so it can feel a little bit competitive in that regard, because they steal the animal that you were eyeing up. But ultimately it wasn't too annoying that I found, and there is a worker meeple, one of your zookeeper meeples, that you can use to alleviate that aspect a little bit. This aspect was never really too frustrating, because ultimately there's always going to be something that you can do. And I have found that each of the animals do have a very similar sort of benefit overall, as long as you're not sort of waiting for that last species to grab one of those conservation projects. And even if so, you could look to hopefully get them next round. But ultimately, there's a little bit of competition, but not too much. So the main drawback that I could think about this game from a multiplayer perspective would be potential for downtime. As I said, I have only played this one 2-player, and our 2-player playthrough took about 3 hours, so I cannot comment too much on how a 3 or 4-player game would maybe play, but I anticipate that it would sort of stretch into the 3.5–4 hour mark. The main areas of downtime that I could see would be definitely in the summer phase, when you are looking at the animal exchange. Ultimately, in that phase, there is nothing that you're really going to be able to do on your turn until the other players have finished deciding what they are trading. If they grab the animal that you are after, you're going to need to sit back and reconsider where your focus is. The other area where it's going to be quite critical in terms of like downtime is going to be the building phase during autumn. Now, I did say that this can be done simultaneously, and that is true. Obviously, that does rely on everyone being very comfortable with the rules and knowing exactly what they're doing. There is quite a lot of variation as well in terms of how fast that phase goes. So for example, one turn I may not actually be creating a new enclosure. I may just be expanding existing enclosures in my zoo and maybe buying a building. So I will be done in about 30 seconds, whereas person next to me may be integrating 2 new enclosures, a co-species, expanding an existing enclosure, have so much money that they're also buying a building, buying extra focal points as well, and so they could be there for another good 5 minutes than you are, and you're having to wait for them to finish before you then progress to the next phase. Overall, as it is done simultaneously, hopefully people will learn to keep that game moving. So ultimately, I think that's about it to comment on from a multiplayer perspective versus solo. There is very much a multiplayer solitaire point of view from this game, where there's very minimal player interaction. You are very much focusing on building up your zoo from scratch. Overall though, I think the solo mode does a really, really good job of trying to simulate the feel of that multiplayer game without having that increase in runtime, so you can solely focus on your ultimate zoo and not worrying about trying to run something else alongside it. So we'll now move on to Ark Nova. I know a lot of people online have sort of commented like, is this just like a rehash of Ark Nova? What are the differences between the games? Does it feel basically like the same game? Or which one they would prefer if they're looking at a zoo management type game. So I will just go over, because I have played both of them and I actually have playthroughs of both of these on my channel. I'll pop the links in the comments down below if you are interested. I will just give you my thoughts on how I feel that these games differ. So I would say Ark Nova is a slightly less complex game that does create the feeling of building up a zoo, but in quite a different way. It's very less focused on like micromanaging your particular animals and is much more focused on set collecting certain types of animals to ultimately push up your conservation values. It also has a much less spatial puzzle aspect. You're still like doing some tile placement on your zoo, much like in Zoo Tycoon, but it's got much less of an overall impact to your gameplay, I personally feel. I do also feel that the theme of the zoo sort of building theme is a little bit less felt in Ark Nova as compared to Zoo Tycoon. I feel like it's a little bit more detached in sort of theme. Also to say, the solo mode, when you grab it out of the box, Ark Nova presents itself as a race. You are trying to race to cross two particular markers on your scoring sections. You're trying to push up your, is it like revenue on your ticket price and your conservation, and the game, once the game end triggers, which you don't have any control over really, you need to have got your markers crossed, otherwise you end with minus points. The solo mode in Zoo Tycoon the board game, it's much less of a race aspect and you're very much just plodding along doing your own thing, but still trying to push up those tracks ultimately just to get bonuses rather than end game points essentially. So the solo mode of Ark Nova certainly doesn't appeal to some people. I personally really like it, but if you don't like that sort of race aspect, there is a fan-made Automa mode out there which simulates a multiplayer game, which is just fantastic. And once again, you can find all of those details on Board Game Geek. So if you were after that particular feel, don't necessarily be put off by Ark Nova from that perspective. So ultimately, when I play Ark Nova, the thing I'm most concerned about is set collecting as quick as possible according to what conservation projects are out there, and trying to push up my conservation track particularly as quick as possible, because that is where the crunch point is, and that's going to be the deciding point essentially when you are looking at your overall points and whether you're going to succeed in winning the game. So Zoo Tycoon, I do feel feels quite different from that. You're much more focused on micromanaging your individual animals and their happiness. You are still trying to push up various tracks, but this is much more intimately linked to the individual animals, whereas in Ark Nova you can basically ignore them once you're in your zoo. In Zoo Tycoon you absolutely cannot, and they are essential to every round of the game. There's a much greater focus on slightly smaller aspects of the game, so like your tile placement and the puzzle spatial aspect of your layout of your zoo. And again, all of the animal happiness and the individual like shelters that you build for them. It definitely does feel like a more complete thematic experience. So if that is what you're after in a game, I think Zoo Tycoon could be the game for you over Ark Nova, but just be aware that it is, I feel, a step up in complexity. If you are not willing to do slightly extra work in terms of smoothing out some rules, maybe Ark Nova would be more the game for you. So that is it for my review. I will now just talk very briefly for my final thoughts if you have skipped right to the end. Overall, I feel that Zoo Tycoon is a fantastic game, especially solo game as well, that has many different mechanisms in it to encapsulate the feeling, theme, and complexities of running a zoo. My main pro of this game, of course, is the components, but also how this game brings the theme to life. I feel like this game is so thematic in how it considers all of the individual animal behaviours, how it's so integral that you're considering all their happiness and spatial aspects of all their habitats, and that just creates a really, really fun, rewarding experience. There's so much strategy to this game, and it's just a really great time. This is a beat your own score type game, but overall I do feel like that this one keeps my interest. There are certain like scoring criteria you can compare yourself to, so you're always trying to get a certain score to get the better category essentially. So far this one has definitely kept my interest. I feel like it is different enough from game to game to feel like an interesting game each time. My main con about this game is probably focused on the rulebook and the slight lack of attention to the solo mode. So there's no solo player aid, which I feel in this game is pretty essential unless you are really up together with knowing the intricacies of the rules. The rulebook definitely could have done with more intricate examples and just overall tidying up so you know exactly what's going on in certain areas of the game. If you are, however, prepared to just do a little bit of extra legwork, this is a game that I do really feel is worth it. And ultimately, it's not too difficult to get over those hurdles. Just most of my questions are all on Board Game Geek. You can have a look at all of those. The designer is so helpful. And once you sort of get over those particular little crunchy points in the game, it's a much smoother experience. Other than that, I don't actually think I have many cons about the overall gameplay. Ultimately, in a multiplayer perspective, there is going to be some downtime, I think. But in a solo game, it doesn't matter. So long as you've got some of the table space to keep it set up, it's not one that you're going to be able to sort of pack away mid-game. There's a lot of pieces out there. I think that this one is a really great time. So I will give this one a very arbitrary rating out of 10, just because, well, I've never really rated games out of 10 before. This is my first ever review on the channel. I don't know if this is going to be something that I do more of in the future. So I thought I'm going to give it a rating out of 10 just so people can sort of gauge how well I like this game if they don't want to listen to the whole review. But overall, I think I would give this game, as it stands from the solo mode perspective, an 8 out of 10. This game is slightly let down in terms of the bits that I said before with the rulebook and the lack of player aid and some missing in-depth examples in the rulebooks especially, and some extra depth to the solo mode. I would have liked to have seen like some achievements or scenarios or something a little bit extra there. That would have alleviated it, elevated it rather, to perhaps a 9.5 for me. I think this is a really fantastic game and I have been having a whale of a time with it and I cannot wait to play it more. It has more than met my expectations. So that is my complete review of Zoo Tycoon the board game. I hope you've enjoyed this and this has been useful to you today. Do let me know in the comments what you think of this game so far, if you've received it or if this is something you're still waiting for, because I know it's still in fulfillment around the world. And I hope you're really excited to receive your copy and you're really pleased when you receive it. So thank you very much for watching today. I really appreciate your time. If you did enjoy the content, please consider subscribing to the channel and you will be let know of any future releases that I do. Otherwise, have a lovely rest of your day and I will see you on the next one. Bye bye.